The city streets were unusually quiet that morning, a soft fog hanging low over the sidewalks. People hurried past each other, eyes fixed on their phones, completely unaware of the storm brewing in Officer Mark Reynolds' mind. Mark was not a bad man entirely, but anger and prejudice had always simmered beneath the surface of his uniform. Today, that anger had found a reason, and it would cost someone dearly. Jasmine Carter walked slowly down the street, her hand gently resting on her swollen belly. She was 8 months pregnant, her steps careful and deliberate, her mind filled with thoughts of the life growing inside her. The morning sunlight touched her face softly, casting a gentle glow that made her look serene, almost untouchable. But Mark didn't see serenity. He saw difference, and in that difference his hatred found a target. "Hey, stop right there," Mark barked, stepping in front of her. His voice was harsh, sudden, echoing through the quiet street. Jasmine froze. Fear surged through her chest, not for herself, but for the tiny life inside her. "I'm not doing anything wrong, officer," she said softly, trying to maintain her calm. Her voice was steady, but her heart raced. Mark sneered, leaning forward slightly. "You don't get to walk here like you own the street," he snapped. His hand shot out before he even thought about it, and in a shocking moment he shoved her hard. Jasmine stumbled backward, her feet scraping against the pavement. Pain shot through her side and she gasped sharply, clutching her belly as tears welled in her eyes. "Stop! Please stop!" she cried, her voice shaking. People passing by froze, staring at the scene in disbelief. No one moved at first, unsure how to intervene. Jasmine's body trembled as she struggled to regain her balance, fear and pain coursing through her simultaneously. Mark took a step back, chest heaving, convinced he had just taught her a lesson. But even as he walked away, a strange emptiness tugged at the edges of his mind. He ignored it, telling himself that she deserved it, that she was just another person who should obey him. Jasmine lowered herself to the curb, her hand still protectively on her belly. Tears streaked her face, mingling with the morning dew on the pavement. Her mind spun, thoughts rushing faster than her heart. How could someone so cruel exist? How could someone in uniform, sworn to protect, hurt a helpless woman? Her anger mingled with fear, creating a storm inside her chest. Around her, the world continued moving. A jogger glanced briefly, muttered something under his breath, and ran on. A delivery man stopped for a moment, looked at her worriedly, and then drove off. No one came close, no one reached out to help her. The loneliness, the shock, the disbelief, it all weighed heavily on her. And yet, deep down, she refused to break. She straightened, inhaled sharply, and whispered to herself, "I am stronger than this. He cannot break me. I am carrying life, and that makes me stronger than him." Her hands rubbed gently over her belly, feeling the small kicks, the tiny heartbeat. Those movements reminded her that she was not alone. She was never truly alone. Meanwhile, Mark walked back to his patrol car, slamming the door behind him. Anger still burned in his chest, but something else, a tiny uncomfortable feeling, crept in. For the first time that day, he felt the weight of what he had done, though he quickly pushed it aside. He didn't yet realize that the ripple of his actions would return to him in ways he could never imagine. As Jasmine collected herself and slowly walked home, the morning sun glinting off the pavement, the city seemed quieter than ever. But in that quiet, a storm was quietly forming. A storm that would shake lives, challenge hearts, and force truths into the light. Mark Reynolds sat at his desk in the police precinct, trying to push the morning's incident out of his mind. But the image of Jasmine stumbling on the street haunted him. Her face, the fear in her eyes, the way she held her belly, he couldn't erase it. He felt a strange weight in his chest, a gnawing unease he had never felt before. He tried to focus on paperwork, tried to pretend it hadn't happened, but every file on his desk blurred together. Then a whisper caught his attention. "Mark, did you hear about that woman this morning?" a colleague murmured, glancing nervously at him. Mark frowned, curious but cautious. "What about her?" he asked, trying to sound casual. She's Chief Carter's wife," the colleague said quietly, eyes wide. "The one you shoved this morning?" Mark froze. The words didn't make sense at first. Chief Carter was his boss, the man who had authority over his career, the one he had to report to every day. And now, suddenly, the woman he had harmed, the pregnant woman he had shoved in anger, was his boss's wife. His throat went dry. "No, that can't be true," he whispered, shaking his head. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow, desperate. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of his desk. Every nerve in his body screamed in disbelief and fear. The colleague nodded. I saw her earlier today. She went to the hospital to get checked. You should know, Mark, this is serious. Serious. The word echoed in his mind. Serious? This was no longer about anger or a small act of cruelty. This was about a life he had endangered. About someone he had no right to hurt. Someone who mattered to his boss more than he could understand. His stomach churned. Panic and guilt collided in a violent storm inside him. Mark left the precinct, pacing in the parking lot. His uniform felt heavy, almost suffocating. How could he have been so blind, so cruel? He had let his hatred take control without thinking, without realizing the consequences. And now the consequences had a face, a name, and a life that depended on care, not cruelty. He remembered Jasmine's trembling hands, the fear in her voice, the way she had whispered, "I am stronger than this," and now, knowing who she was, the memory stabbed deeper. He could almost hear Chief Carter's voice, imagine the anger and disappointment, imagine the trust he had shattered. Mark sank onto a bench outside, burying his face in his hands. Tears pricked at his eyes, not just from fear, but from shame. For the first time in his life, he understood the weight of his actions. It wasn't enough to apologize quietly to himself. He had hurt someone deeply, someone innocent, and there was no way to undo that pain. He thought about the baby she carried, the life he had threatened with a single cruel shove. Every beat of that tiny heart was now linked to his guilt, and every step he took in that moment was shadowed by fear of what was to come. Mark's anger, his prejudice, his pride, they all felt useless now, meaningless against the reality of what he had done. He finally looked up, the sun reflecting off the city buildings, casting long shadows across the pavement. Mark's mind raced, but clarity began to emerge from the panic. He could not change the past, but he could face the truth. He could admit his mistake. He could seek forgiveness, even if it meant losing everything he had worked for. The thought of standing before Chief Carter, telling him what he had done, terrified him. But he knew it was the only way to begin fixing the damage, the only way to stop running from the storm he had caused. Mark stood slowly, his legs shaking. Every step toward the precinct felt heavier than the last. He realized in that quiet, tense moment that his life had changed forever. The anger that had guided him for so long now seemed small, foolish, and destructive, and he knew deep down that if he did not face Jasmine, face Chief Carter, and face himself, he would carry this guilt for the rest of his life. The morning sunlight was brighter now, but it felt sharp, almost accusing. Mark took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he had to do. The storm was coming, and this time there was no escaping it. Mark Reynolds sat alone in his small apartment that evening, the city lights flickering outside his window. The room felt colder than usual, even though the heater hummed softly. He couldn't eat. He couldn't focus. All he could see, all he could hear was Jasmine's face, the fear in her eyes, the trembling of her hands as she clutched her belly. Every time he closed his eyes, the moment replayed like a cruel film, her stumble, the gasp, the tears. For the first time in his life, Mark felt the full weight of guilt. It was heavy, suffocating, and relentless. He had always justified his anger, telling himself that people like her were problems he needed to control. But now there was no excuse. No authority, no badge, no pride could erase what he had done. He had hurt someone innocent, someone who trusted the world to protect her. And worse, she was pregnant. He pressed his hands over his face, trying to stop the memories, but they would not leave. He thought of Chief Carter, his boss, the man who had trusted him to serve honorably. Mark could already imagine the look of disappointment on his face if he ever learned the truth. The thought made his chest tighten, his stomach churn, and a cold sweat form on his brow. "I was wrong," he whispered, his voice breaking in the empty room. "I was so wrong." The guilt gnawed at him, refusing to let him rest. Every sound outside the window, a car horn, a passing siren, a child laughing, reminded him of life moving on, unaware of the harm he had caused. But Mark couldn't move on. He couldn't escape the knowledge that a small moment of hatred had almost caused irreparable damage. He had allowed his anger to become violence, and that thought terrified him more than anything. Hours passed.
He didn't eat.
He didn't sleep. He sat staring at the floor, thinking about the tiny life she carried. How could he have been so cruel, so blind? He imagined the baby kicking inside her, completely unaware of the danger he had brought. He thought about the mother-to-be's fear, the pain he had inflicted, and a deep shame settled over him, heavier than any punishment he could ever face. Mark realized he had two choices: continue living in denial, letting hate define him, or face the truth and try to make amends. The first option seemed easier, safer, but he knew in his heart it would never bring him peace. The second option terrified him, but it was the only way he could begin to repair the damage he had done. Tears streamed down his face as he finally admitted it aloud. "I have to apologize. I have to make this right." Somehow, even saying it felt insufficient. Words could not undo the shove, the fear, the pain. But action, real, honest action, might be a start. And it had to begin with Jasmine, the woman he had harmed, the life he had endangered. He had to face her, confess, and show her he meant to change. As midnight approached, Mark finally stood, his legs unsteady but determined. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. The man staring back at him was not proud, not brave, not even strong. He was flawed, ashamed, and human. And for the first time he realized that being human also meant taking responsibility, even when it was painful. He took a deep breath, feeling the heaviness in his chest, and whispered to himself, "I will not run. I will not hide. I have to face what I've done. I owe her that much, and more." Outside, the city slept, oblivious to the storm brewing in Mark's heart. Inside, a small flicker of resolve ignited. A promise that he would try to make amends, that he would confront his own cruelty, and that he would not allow hate to guide him ever again. The guilt still burned, but it was now joined by a fragile, trembling sense of hope. Mark knew the path ahead would be difficult. Apologies might not be enough. Forgiveness might not come easily. But for the first time, he understood that redemption was possible if he was willing to face himself honestly and work tirelessly to make things right. And in that quiet apartment, under the dim glow of the streetlights, Mark Reynolds decided he would do just that, one step at a time, no matter how long it took, no matter how painful it would be. The next morning, Mark Reynolds woke with a heavy heart. The city outside was alive, buzzing with people rushing to work, children laughing on their way to school, and the hum of cars filling the streets. But Mark felt none of that energy. Inside him, a storm raged, a storm of guilt, fear, and a desperate need for redemption. He knew what he had to do. There was no running now, no excuses left. Jasmine Carter, the woman he had harmed, had to hear his apology. He had to face her, look into her eyes, and accept whatever anger or disappointment she felt. His pride, his fear, even his hatred, all had to be set aside. For the first time, Mark understood that being brave didn't mean enforcing rules or showing strength. Being brave meant taking responsibility for the pain he caused. Mark found himself standing outside her apartment building, hands trembling. He looked up at the windows, imagining her there, perhaps still shaken, still scared. He took a deep breath, the cold morning air burning his lungs, and stepped forward. "Ms. Carter," he said quietly, his voice almost shaking. She opened the door, surprise flashing across her face. Her eyes, usually so calm and strong, held a flicker of wariness. She didn't speak. She simply stared, waiting for him to explain himself. I need to say something," Mark continued, swallowing hard. I'm so sorry. What I did yesterday, it was wrong. I should never have pushed you. I let my anger and my own prejudice take over, and I'm ashamed of myself. You did not deserve that, especially not while you were carrying a child." Jasmine's face remained calm, but her eyes searched his, measuring the sincerity behind his words. Mark's hands shook as he spoke, and tears pricked at the corners of his eyes. "I cannot undo what I did," he whispered, his voice breaking. "But I want to try to make amends. I want to learn. I want to be better. Please, I am begging you. Forgive me if you can." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Jasmine's expression softened slightly, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Do you even understand what you did? The fear, the pain, the risk you put me and my baby in?" Mark nodded immediately, shame washing over him. "Yes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I understand now, and I will never forget it. I will do whatever it takes to make sure nothing like this ever happens again." Jasmine took a deep breath and looked down at her belly, the small life growing inside her reminding her of strength and patience. "Actions speak louder than words, Mark. I don't know if I can forgive you completely yet, but I see you are trying. That is a start. Her words, though cautious, gave him a glimmer of hope. For the first time in days, Mark felt a flicker of relief, a light breaking through the darkness of his guilt. It was fragile, trembling, but real. I understand, he said softly, nodding. I will prove it not just with words, but with everything I do from now on. Jasmine's lips curved slightly, just a hint of a smile. Good, that's all anyone can ask for. But remember, this is about more than me. This is about changing the person you are inside. Mark swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking deep into his heart. He realized that true redemption would not come from forgiveness alone. It would come from confronting the darkness within himself and choosing every day to be better. As he left the apartment building, the morning sun breaking through the clouds, Mark felt a strange mixture of relief and determination. The road ahead would be long and difficult, filled with challenges he could not yet imagine, but he had taken the first step. He had faced his guilt, confronted the person he had hurt, and begun the journey to become someone worthy of trust again. And somewhere deep inside, Mark felt a small spark of hope, fragile, but alive. A hope that one day he could truly make things right, and that the life he had threatened would grow safely, surrounded by care, not cruelty. Mark Reynolds sat in his car outside the police precinct, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Inside, the office hummed with routine, officers typing reports, radios crackling, and the distant laughter of colleagues sharing small jokes. But Mark felt none of that. His stomach churned with fear and his heart pounded like a drum. Today he had to face the one person he had been avoiding, Chief Carter. He had apologized to Jasmine, and though her words had been cautious, they had given him a sliver of hope. But this was bigger. This was his boss, the man who had trusted him, relied on him, and believed in his professionalism. And now, he had betrayed that trust in the worst way possible. Mark pushed open the precinct door, walking down the hallway with hesitant steps. Every sound seemed amplified. The click of his shoes on the tile floor, the murmur of voices, the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. Each step brought him closer to the office where Chief Carter sat, and each step made his chest tighten with dread. He knocked gently, then stepped inside. Chief Carter looked up from his paperwork, his expression neutral at first. "Reynolds," he said, his voice calm but with an edge of authority. "What is it?" Mark swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Sir, I need to tell you something," he began, his voice quivering. Chief Carter's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing the seriousness in Mark's tone. I assaulted your wife yesterday morning," Mark admitted, his words trembling. "I shoved her. I lost control. I let my anger and prejudice take over. I'm ashamed of myself, and I know I've hurt someone who did not deserve it. I don't know how to make it right, but I wanted to tell you the truth." The office was silent. Chief Carter's face was unreadable, his eyes dark and steady, studying Mark as if peeling away layers to see the truth beneath. Mark's heart raced, his palms sweaty, his knees weak. He had never felt so small, so exposed, so utterly vulnerable. "Do you understand the gravity of what you did?" Chief Carter asked finally, his voice low and controlled. "Do you know the danger you put her in? She is carrying your boss's child, Reynolds. Do you even realize how reckless and cruel that was?" Mark's head dropped. "Yes, sir. I understand completely, and I am willing to accept any consequences. I know words are not enough. I just wanted to face the truth, and I am ready to do whatever is necessary to make amends." Chief Carter leaned back in his chair, his expression softening slightly, though the anger in his eyes never disappeared. "Reynolds, it is one thing to make a mistake in judgment. It is another to act on hate. You need to understand the harm you caused. This is not just about punishment, it's about learning, about change. Do you understand that?" "Yes, sir," Mark whispered, his voice barely audible. "I understand. I want to change. I want to be better. I don't want to hurt anyone again. I want to prove that I am capable of respect and care and justice, not cruelty." Chief Carter studied him for a long moment. Then he spoke again, his voice calmer, more measured. "Actions speak louder than words, Reynolds. You have a long road ahead. Apologies are just the start. You must show through every choice every day that you have learned from this and that you are truly capable of being better." Mark nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes, relief mixed with fear, shame mixed with hope. He had faced the man he had wronged, admitted his guilt, and accepted responsibility. The journey of redemption was only beginning, and he knew it would not be easy. As he left the office, the weight of confession pressed down on him, but he also felt a strange lightness, a first step toward healing, toward becoming a better man. He realized that change would require time, effort, and courage, but for the first time he believed it was possible. Outside, the sun was setting, casting golden light over the city. Mark inhaled deeply, feeling the crisp evening air fill his lungs. He had faced the truth, and in that moment he understood that guilt could be a guide, not just a burden. It could lead him toward the person he hoped to become, a man who respected life, protected the innocent, and never let hatred guide his actions again. Days turned into weeks, and Mark Reynolds felt the weight of his actions every single moment. He couldn't undo the harm he had caused, but he could try to make it right. Every day he reminded himself that change was not just about words, it was about consistent actions, small steps toward proving that he had learned from his mistakes. Mark began attending anger management and sensitivity training. At first it was humiliating. Sitting in a circle, hearing others speak about empathy and understanding, he felt exposed, almost broken, but slowly something inside him shifted. He realized that his anger had always been a shield, hiding fear and ignorance. Every session peeled away a layer of that anger, leaving him raw but honest, ready to face the truth about himself. He also started volunteering in community programs, helping people he had once ignored, people he had judged unfairly. Every small act, a conversation, lending a hand, listening without judgment, was a step toward making amends. Each time he saw someone smile or feel supported because of his efforts, it reminded him why he needed to change. Redemption wasn't quick and it wasn't easy, but it was possible. Jasmine, too, began to notice the change in him, though cautiously. At first, she kept her distance, watching him from afar, seeing whether his apologies were real or just empty words. Slowly, she allowed small interactions, brief nods on the street, polite greetings, her way of testing whether he had truly learned the lesson of humility and respect. One afternoon, Mark saw her walking with a friend in the park. He approached carefully, hands in his pockets, voice gentle. "Miss Carter," he said softly. She turned, surprised but composed. "Mark," she replied, her tone even but measured. "I just wanted to say, I am still learning. I am trying to be better every day. I cannot take back what I did, but I want you to know I will do everything I can to prevent hurting anyone again. I want to be a man who respects life, respects people, respects you." Jasmine looked at him, her eyes searching not for words but for truth. The morning sun reflected off her hair, soft and bright, and Mark felt a pang of regret mixed with hope. She nodded slightly. "I see your effort, Mark. That is important. Change takes time. Actions, not words, will show me you mean it." Mark's chest tightened with emotion. Her words were not forgiveness, they were a challenge. But he welcomed it. He welcomed the opportunity to show that he could be better, that he could rise above the anger and hatred that had once consumed him. Evenings became a time of reflection. Mark would sit alone thinking about Jasmine, the baby she carried, and the countless lives that he could now impact positively. He promised himself that every choice, every step, every interaction would be guided by respect and empathy. His uniform was no longer just a badge, it was a responsibility to protect, not intimidate. As weeks passed, the tension inside him slowly eased, replaced by determination. The guilt remained, but it had transformed into motivation, a fire that pushed him to improve, to grow, to be the man he had failed to be before. He understood now that redemption was not a single moment. It was a lifelong commitment, and he was ready to commit. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Mark saw Jasmine watching her baby kick through her belly. He stood at a distance, quiet and respectful, feeling a sense of peace he had never known. That small life, the life he had once endangered, was a symbol of hope and resilience, and in that moment, Mark Reynolds realized that he too could change, could grow, and could become someone worthy of trust and respect. The path ahead would not be easy, but Mark was ready. He had faced himself, faced the consequences of his actions, and begun the slow, painful, and beautiful journey of healing, not just for Jasmine, but for himself, and for the person he hoped to become. Months had passed since that terrible morning, but Mark Reynolds never forgot it. Every day had been a battle with himself, a constant reminder of the harm he had caused and the life he had almost jeopardized. He had changed in ways he never thought possible. He had learned humility, respect, and the strength it took to admit one's mistakes. But the true test of his transformation was yet to come. One crisp morning, Mark received news that Jasmine was going into labor. His heart raced, not with fear this time, but with a deep, trembling hope. He knew he would not be allowed in the delivery room, and he did not expect any gratitude or forgiveness from her. Yet he felt compelled to be near, to witness the new life that had already taught him so much about responsibility, courage, and redemption. He waited outside the hospital, pacing softly, feeling the weight of the past months and the burden of his guilt. Every siren, every hurried step in the hall reminded him of the fragility of life, and he realized how close he had come to causing irreparable damage. Jasmine's safety, her baby's life, both had depended on his restraint, and for the first time he understood the true meaning of empathy. Hours passed. The city outside moved on, oblivious to the personal storm unfolding inside Mark's mind. Then finally a nurse came out.
Jasmine had delivered a healthy baby boy.
Relief and awe flooded Mark, and for the first time in months he allowed himself to smile through tears. A new life had begun, untouched by his past cruelty, and that thought filled him with a strange, fragile hope. He walked slowly toward the entrance where Jasmine stood, holding her newborn carefully, radiant despite the exhaustion. The sight was humbling. Here was a life untouched by hate, nurtured by love and care. He felt the full force of his mistakes, the pain he had caused, the fear he had inspired, but also the possibility of change. Jasmine noticed him at a distance. She did not scold or accuse. She simply looked at him, calm yet firm, understanding the struggle he had faced. "You've come a long way, Mark," she said softly, almost to herself. "Actions do matter. Change is possible, if it is real." Mark lowered his gaze, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I know I can never undo what I did, but I promise I will spend every day proving I can be better. I will never forget what I've learned." The baby stirred in Jasmine's arms, tiny fists waving, a gentle reminder of life's resilience. Mark watched, silent and respectful, feeling a profound sense of humility wash over him. He realized that redemption was not about words or forgiveness alone. It was about living differently, making choices every day that reflected the lessons learned from past mistakes. In that quiet, sunlit moment, Mark understood the true meaning of responsibility. He had harmed someone, yes, but he had faced the consequences, sought forgiveness, and committed to change. He felt a lightness in his chest, not of pride, but of clarity and determination. He had been given a chance to rise above his cruelty, and he would not waste it. As Jasmine turned back to care for her newborn, Mark took a step away, feeling both sadness and hope. He knew the journey ahead would continue to challenge him, but he also knew he had the tools to face it: humility, empathy, and the courage to be better than he had ever been. Mark walked into the city streets, the evening sun casting long shadows on the pavement. He paused for a moment, breathing deeply, letting the cool air fill his lungs. The memory of his hate, the weight of his guilt, and the power of redemption all mingled together, shaping him into someone new. And in that moment, Mark Reynolds understood the most important truth of his life. The cost of cruelty is high, but the power of change and the strength of the human heart are even greater. He had fallen, yes, but he had risen. And that rising, he knew, was only the beginning.